Another A Level Biology video, Mr. Phillips, and today we're looking at the ecosystems and energy transfer module even, and we're going to be looking at how efficient energy transfer is across the food chain, and then looking at how farmers adapt to try and make that more efficient so they can get more energy into crops. So just to start off, we need to just remember there's two things, biotic and abiotic factors. And a biotic factor is a living thing, so it could be predators, it could be the availability of prey or plants, parasites, mutualism. And then you've got the abiotic factors, which are other things like light, temperature, so non-living things. The reason we're mentioning this is because we're going to be looking at food chains. So biotic factors are things that can affect how well an organism grows. So crops can be affected by the availability of stuff like abiotic, like minerals and things like that. But crops can also be affected by pests and competition from other plants. So these are the things here that we start thinking about, and that's sometimes what farmers need to control. So you need to be able to use food webs and food chains. So you need to understand that each one of these stages of a food chain, so we've got the producer there, is called a trophic level. So you've got your consumer, your primary consumer, which will be a herbivore, okay, secondary consumer, and each one of these is what we call a trophic level. And what you should know is that as you go down the food chain, along the food chain, I should say, really, the biomass decreases. As you go that way, the biomass will decrease, and generally the numbers do too. That doesn't always work, but the biomass definitely does go down. And just remember, even in the producer, the producer itself doesn't get all the energy. So you'll have done this previously, that you talk about the net primary product of the plant, because a lot of the gross primary product is the amount of biomass that can be created after you've lost all the energy. The fact that most of the energy goes through a leaf, very little or is reflected, very little is absorbed by the plant. So then we've got here a picture of generally what happens is only 10% of the energy of the producer is passed on to the primary consumer. Now, 10% of the energy of the consumer is only passed on because most of the plant is indigestible. So the plant, the wood lice can eat that grass, and a lot of it don't get cellulose, and you can't digest that. Generally, the efficiency increases after we've gone past the primary producer, the consumer, the producers of the primary consumer. So how do we calculate them? Well, what is the actual production, the net production for the consumer? Well, only about 10% gets passed on, as we said, from the producer to the primary consumer. And this can be called the consumer net production. And it's worked out by basically going, well, the net production equals the chemical energy in the ingested food. So how much chemical energy is in that piece of leaf, let's say, that the wood lice has eaten. And that is take away the chemical energy that's lost in the feces, so what isn't absorbed, and also the energy that wood lice uses to respire. So the wood lice eats, let's say, 10 grams of biomass from the plant. Let's say that plant had that bit of bio had 50 joules in it, but the wood lice used 10 joules lost 10 joules in its feces and lost 10 joules for respiration. It would have 30 joules left over, and that's all it is. So it's just the total amount of energy consumed in the biomass of the plant. Take away the energy lost in feces and the energy used in respiration. And just think about what I'm saying about respiration. When you respire, yes, it releases energy, but it's releasing energy that's trapped in that chemical energy. You can also calculate then the efficiency between biomass transfer between each trophic level. So if you think about it, if we've got a food chain, and let's say our food chain has our plant, which is the producer, number one, okay, that, let's say, is eaten by our primary consumer, so say something like a cow or something like that, number two, and then that's eaten by humans as number three. How do I calculate the amount of biomass between the efficiency? All I have to do is calculate the amount of biomass at the early levels and later. So let's say, to keep the numbers really simple for this example, let's say there was 100 grams or kilograms of biomass in the grass. The cow managed to gain, the cow had, I don't know, 70 kilograms of biomass, very light cow, but never mind, and let's say 30 here for whatever that is. Okay, so obviously my numbers are not really logical, it's just to tell you. So what you would do is the biomass at the later trophic level, so that would be 70 divided by the biomass at the earlier level, which would be 100, and obviously divide those two together, times it by 100%, that would be 70%, because you'd end up with 0.7, and then you times that by 100%. Okay, or you could do the biomass at the primary consumer and then biomass at the producer. So you always do the previous code, the earlier level on the bottom. So it'll always be 0 point something and then times it into percentage, because it should go down, so it should be less than 100%. Okay, so let's look at this then. So obviously what happens then is that the farming happens, and we want to increase the efficiency of food chains. So we want to do this because we want to increase the efficiency to get less energy lost to other organisms. And how would that happen? Well, it's stuff like pests that are eating our crops. So we want it to be a one singular food chain. We want it to go from the crop to the human, or from the crop to the cow to the human. So any pests in there are adding extra food chains to the ecosystem, and that is therefore meaning the energy, rather than coming down our food chain, goes a different way. And we also want to, particularly for living animals, we want to stop any loss of energy due to respiration. So what do we do? Well, we have a look at this. So how do we remove pests then, which are forming different extra food chains which we don't want? Well, in wheat as an example, they've got two main pests for wheat, and that is aphids, which are tiny insects, and mice, which are obviously rodents. So how do we remove organisms like this? Well, what we do is we might use insecticides. So we might use insecticides to kill insects, for example, and they might be less biomass, so therefore less biomass is lost to the insects as a result, so there's the greater NPP, so net primary productivity of the crops. We could use herbicides if we've got weeds. So weeds are like outcompete our crops by growing quicker, and they might steal the sunlight, they might steal the nutrients from the soil. So basically, if we kill the weed off, we won't have that competition. An example of something that would use to kill the weed would be a herbicide. Now, one way we can kill other organisms is a biological agent. What this means is a living thing which will kill the pest. So we mentioned mice a minute ago. So in areas in hotter countries where there are mice on the fields and cornfields and things like that, they will happily have like rattlesnakes and things on in America, let's say, and they'll introduce them in to try and kill the mice, because the rattlesnakes will kill the mice, they don't eat the crop. So that is a good method. We do that in the UK, but on a smaller scale, less exciting organisms mainly. So we introduce living organisms that will kill the pest, so the energy is not lost out of our food chain. And examples of this could be wasps, and we can actually use wasps. People always say, what's the use of a wasp? Well, you can use a wasp to basically lay the eggs themselves in the caterpillars that then might eat your crops, and then when the wasp's eggs hatch, it kills the caterpillar. Another thing you can do is mites, and you can add different types of mites to kill other types of mites on plants. We can also spray pathogens onto insects to kill them as well. Now, the other side then is reducing respiratory losses. So what I mean by this is you're going to try and reduce the activities that cause you to lose energy and respire off that biomass, that glucose, into using energy. So the main two ways we do this is restricted movement. Okay, so obviously we might use pens to keep animals in, or we might keep them indoors so they don't have to keep themselves warm. That means you get more biomass, and more biomass is produced because from the stored energy, and you increase your net production. It has other advantages as well for us as a population, as a growing population. It produces more food in a smaller area, so you lose less space, less land. It is cheaper, and it also grows quicker because you're intensifying the growth period of that crop or that animal in intensive conditions. The problem is the conditions, particularly for the animals like chickens, broiler chickens, and fastly growing beef cattle, is it's ethical issues, because the animals are often we consider it in cruel conditions, because a lot of the animals suffer because they're indoors all the time, they don't get to move as much, so they get stuff like diseases, and if a pathogen comes in, a lot of the animals can suffer from it. So very ethically questionable, but very successful in growing the food. I hope that's been useful for you guys, and I'll see you again soon to look at the nitrogen cycle.